My name is Jamie McLaren Lachman, also known as Jabulani Nene Shengu, which is my South African name.
Okay, so do you want to tell us about how the Glass Without Borders started in South Africa?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, so I was a performer. Well, first of all, I was originally born here in South Africa, left when I was 6 months old, and arrived in the United States on the day of the Soweto uprising. So it was like my family was a bit part of the struggle and grew up with this strong identity of being South African, but lived in the United States my whole life. And I got involved in theater and physical theater and clowning, and I was working in New York City and doing shows for mostly my friends and critics. Sometimes my friends were my critics, but that's another story. And then what happened was I went on a trip with a girlfriend at the time to Zimbabwe, and like we hitchhiked down to Brightridge and then through South Africa. We rented a car. Rand was very weak to the dollar, so we got like a car for like $8 a day, and like had this great trip. And we went all the way through. Like we visited my aunt who lived in Ulundi, and then went through like the Eastern Cape, and then down through the Garden Route, and ended up here in Cape Town. And it was actually in a restaurant on Long Street called the Carnivore, which doesn't exist anymore. But at that time, it was the only place you could get a good vegetarian meal in Cape Town. So it was the Carnivore because it had really good African like butternuts and spinaches and beans and things like that. And we were sitting there, and we had this amazingly difficult trip, especially because we were taking Larium, which is an anti-malarial prophylactic, and it makes you a bit insane and a bit paranoid and grumpy and depressed. So I don't really recommend that. And that's why when we send our teams out to the field, we get them like the good stuff, with like the Tylenol stuff. Anyways, we were looking at each other, and I was like, I can't come back here to South Africa again as a tourist. Just, you know, it was a bit of a hedonistic trip, and I was like, I want to really give something back to the country I'm from. And that I really, most of the things that I've been lucky to benefit from in my life is in part due to the economic and political oppression of apartheid. And so for me, it was like an opportunity. I thought, like, what can I do to go back, to give something back to South Africa, or to help build the future? And I didn't really have an answer at that time. So then we went back to New York, where we were living, and a week later, I met this guy named Moshe Cohen, whose clown is called Yoo-Hoo, and he was the founder of Clowns Without Borders USA. And he was in town doing a workshop on clowning, and I couldn't take it because I had work, but then he was that evening doing a little talk about Clowns Without Borders. And I went to the talk, and at the end of the talk, I was like, I'm going to bring Clowns Without Borders to South Africa. Because that's like, it was like, for me, it was like a clicking of things together. And because like at the time I really didn't have other skills besides being able to organize things and be very good at coordinating stuff and clowning. And so I thought, well, instead of performing for people I didn't really know and care for in New York City, for audiences that sometimes were about the same size of the cast, I thought maybe we could use our talents to performing in South Africa. So then I raised some money, did some fundraisers, and then 6 months later we did our first tour in 2004 with 2 friends of mine from the United States and an Irish clown. And we went through from like Johannesburg to Mpumalanga, did some shows around Nelspruit, and then down into Swaziland, and then through KwaZulu-Natal, all the way down to the Eastern Cape, and then the Free State, and then down to Cape Town, all in like 17 days. We did like 25 shows, and it was pretty crazy. We would like do a show in the morning, and then get in the car, load everything up, and go, and then we'd arrive in the next place and do another show, and then we'd drive 6 hours, sleep that night, and do another show in the morning. And we literally, our show was based around this too. We were all musicians, and we had our banjos and musical saws and drums and things, and a zoophone, and we just like would show up at the school, pile out as if we were traveling musicians, found an audience, do the show, pack up our audience stuff, and put it back in the car, and then play with the kids for a bit, and then drive around. So that's kind of like the beginning. So the next time that so that trip was amazing, but I felt like really rushed, and it was like kind of like just getting an idea of what was possible. As soon as I got back to the United States, I was like, I want to do more of this, and I wanted to find a way of doing it with a deeper impact. Every tour, every show, we would always ask ourselves, how can we make the show better? How can we provide what you would want to provide on Broadway or in the West End, but for children in the middle of KwaZulu-Natal, in a very rural town up in Limpopo. And so we would always like rehearse and work afterwards, after shows, or like discuss that routine over here. If we just did it like this, maybe we can do that thing over here. The horns, if the horns came in at this time, and we just like really work on the things just to try and make them better. And the same thing about the like tours themselves. After the whole project, we were like, what could we do to have a better, more meaningful impact on the children's lives? And so the next time we went, we decided in each place we would go, we would perform at all the schools. So we spent 3 months doing shows. And then the next time I came, I did a 5-month trip, and then we started doing these workshops for the kids. And like, take the school, and all of the classes would get some sort of theater, art space, circus arts kind of interaction with the clowns, with the artists, and then at the after school, we had an after school program for orphans and vulnerable children. This was in Ikopo and KwaZulu-Natal. And we were able to really like reach a lot of children and have a little bit more meaningful impact on their lives. And throughout that, like we were always still kind of questioning, so what? Like what are we leaving behind? How can we improve what we're doing, or how can we make it more transformational? And it was in 2007 where I decided that the going back and forth and raising funds from performing in schools in the United States and going back to do shows in South Africa was just not really sustainable, and also paying for these flights for all these Americans and people from Europe to come over. And there's also questions about like colonialism and like kind of like or neo-colonialism. So I got lucky and I got a job in Durban working for a Swedish circus company called Circus Secor. And they were doing this project with street children, and they were bringing a circus and like using circus as a way to kind of help street children transition into like families. And they were bringing a lot of artists from Sweden to do this, and they asked me to manage the project because it was kind of falling apart. And I was like, I'd do that, but I only want to work with South African artists. And so I was able to meet some amazing South African artists, including Sibongile Soanyane, who's like one of our now main core master trainers of our parenting programs. And we did shows all over KwaZulu-Natal together, and was able to then start KwaZulu South Africa. So it was 2007. That's a short story.
Is there anything else you want to say about why it is important for you to get involved with Clowns Without Borders here in this place?
Well, so for me, it's a way of reconnecting to being South African. I mean, I sound American. I basically dress American. I look American. I act American, people tell me, but like part of me deeply is still connected to being South African. And yeah. Mm-hmm. So that's why I want to do Clowns Without Borders here and not some other place.
Yeah, that's amazing. Could you tell us 5 words that could describe Clowns Without Borders?
Mm-hmm. I only have 4.
Yeah, okay.
Well, there's a couple of things.
Yeah.
Okay, so one would be choose your own adventure, right? That's 4 words. Because it really is like this organization that we kind of have ideas of, oh wow, let's do this thing about storytelling, or let's do parenting programs. And then we're like, okay, because it's like improvisation, and improvisation you say yes and when you're doing things. And so it's like, oh yeah, and we can do this. And then suddenly, boom, there's our story, your story. Boom, there's parenting for lifelong health. Or wow, we're doing a tour in South Sudan. And it is like a really an adventure. And also for kids, it's like giving them a sense of adventure in their lives. So I think that, like, if there was a sentence, that would be that. If I had to choose separate words, it would probably be like play, connection, peace, laughter, and fun.
That's good. So can you tell us a bit about what children being children again mean for you?
Children being children again?
Yeah.
Well, so we work in areas where, we like to say we work in places where other people aren't working, or where people are working but they could use a little bit more support, especially on maybe connecting with community or connecting with each other, or boosting like an intervention like washing hands or things, but places where there's less action. So we don't actually do very much work, like for instance in Cape Town, because there's a lot of NGOs that do amazing work in Cape Town. You won't see us like doing so much here, but we'll go to, like for instance, we were just in internally displaced camps in South Sudan and all around South Sudan, or we'll do tours in like the Northern Cape in places where there's a community organization, but not very many artistic organizations. And a lot of the places where we perform, kids are have been affected by a lot of different levels of adversity, sometimes multiple adversities, from like high rates of endemic poverty, HIV/AIDS, and the impact of the pandemic has had on their lives, both as affected and also being orphaned by HIV/AIDS, war, disease, natural disasters like the floods and fires that we've recently seen. And so I think the way that Clowns Without Borders thinks of children being children again is that children already have, they're like clowns in some ways, they have already an innate sense of resiliency. And for us, our job is to kind of spark that resiliency, to allow them to be children again, even though the traumas and the challenges and difficulties might have taken that opportunity away for a while. We're there to kind of give them that space to realize their potential as children, and then, you know, through development and things, and they can then realize their potential as human beings in this world. And so sometimes we even have to work with the people who are working with the children so that they can allow children to be children again. So lots of time, also children, at least in sub-Saharan Africa, also have to do lots of things like take care of other children, or chores in the house, or even working. And so we also want to like honor the importance of being able to play and to be able to explore and to choose your own adventure.
So what is your favorite memory as a child?
My favorite memory? Is this one of the questions? Oh man.
A funny memory of...
I have a lot of I was thinking actually about like memories about things that we did over the years that were like, I mean, there's like times when, there was a time when we were doing workshops in a place, it's called Amazing Grace's Children Home in Malalan in Mpumalanga. And we were doing these workshops with these kids, life dreams workshops. And we were like, I told a story about like a child who has a dream and she sets off to find a way. It's like the hero's journey. And then the kids then have to like think about what they would like to do or become in their lives. And then we help them do like create a show where they get to write the play of how it happens and direct it for the other kids, and then choose who's going to be them, and then they become, it's a very empowering experience. And one of the kids wanted to be a song, and he was a child with developmental delays, and you know, all the other kids kind of laughed at him because it wasn't like a taxi driver or like a president or a doctor or something. And yeah, we were like, yes, you're going to be a song. And just like we created this play with him about like how he became a song, and it was just really beautiful. And just like to remember, like, I mean, I can like picture his smile, like when he was able to kind of follow that dream, even though it wasn't like a very practical, literal kind of thing. That's what children are like. Yeah, why not be a song? So, I mean, there's lots of times when we've done work with families, and I've witnessed parents or grandmothers talking about their differences, changes in the connections with their children. Like one grandmother said that when she used to come to her home, all her children would run away because all she did was yell at them and tell them that they're worthless or hit them if they're bad. And then she said, over the course of the work that we were doing, that now the children's come running up to her and saying, "When are we going to have another story?" And the best part about this was that she said, the thing that I like the most is now my child will bring me tea. And it's like that kind of connection of the simple acts of human kindness that make a family a loving family for me. It's We have another funny memory that was a memory of me and Sibongile and a clown from the United States, Selena. And we were doing a tour in Addis Ababa, and we showed up at the school. And usually, so just to give context, when we used to do a show, we come in, they've never seen, a lot of these places have never seen us perform or seen a theater production or anything like that. And we go in and we set up the audience. So the first thing we do is we go and talk to the principal and say, "Hey, how many kids are in your school? Great, we're gonna, if we can have a couple of classrooms come out one by one, and then they'll put their chairs in a certain area, and we'll we'll have the little kids and then the older kids, and we make a little theater where kind of with different levels based on the ages of the children, and the last people are always standing up on desks looking over." And so we went into the school, and he's like, how many people are you having? It's like, we have 500. It's like, oh, okay, we can do that. 500 is easy. So we're like, okay, this huge courtyard. So we'll take the corner of the courtyard over here, and then we'll make a semicircle, and we'll have the kids come out. We have planned it, and we found a classroom that was empty, so we even started bringing out the benches, so make a first row so that the kids can't. If you don't do that, we've had this in our second year of doing shows. We were doing shows in Soweto, and we had to cancel them because the kids got closer and closer and closer until there was no space. And then the teachers came out with belts and started hitting the kids back. And we were like, "No, you can't do that." So we grabbed the belts, and it was just a disaster. So we learned from clowns learn from failure. So we learned from our mistakes, and we came up with a really good method. So this is now 7 years later, and we're doing this tour in 2010 in Ethiopia. And so we set it up, we're all ready. And then, we always go back to the van because we wanted to make a little parade going in. We were doing this parade with the song. It was a hit tune from the 80s that was about Zola Bud. And it went, Zola Bud, Izola Bud, Izola Bud, Izola Bud. Izola Bud, Sai Bamba, Sai Gibel, Izola Bud, Izola Bud. We played this at the banjo, and Spo was on the drums, and Selena was on the violin. So we're tuning up and getting ready, and then we look out the van, and we're like, "That looks like a bit more." And we had our people from our partner organizations that were organizing this, and it was the seventh day of the tour, so we were like, they knew what to do. But we looked out, and it was it looks like there's more than 500 people here. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna get my nose off. I'm gonna run outside, and I'm like, okay, find the principal. What's going on? It's I can't find the principal anywhere. But we know that there's people from different schools because they're some are wearing a blue uniform, some are wearing an orange uniform, and some are purple. It turns out there were 5 schools from the area came, and each school brought 500 kids. So suddenly we're having to set up. So I'm like, okay, guys, get out of the car. Let's go. We have to organize the audience to make it so that it's safe. And we had kids in classrooms, so that looked out onto the performance area. We put some kids up in the balcony areas. It just took us an hour and a half just to set up the kids. And so one person was doing fun things in the middle just to keep their attention. And then finally, to get in. And I remember Selena, who was our leader, and she's like, "How do I get in?" I was just like, "You just go!" It's this thing, go. And I have my banjo, and I'm swinging it this to keep us a space to go through. And we make our way through into the front, the place. And now it's doing a show in a round. And it was the most amazing show. We had like a chair and our instruments and a little sound thing that was worthless because there were so many people. And like everything was huge. So like when you got a kid, you would be like, ah, and you had to like share it with everybody. So it's this like amazing show. And the kids were just like, when you hear 2,000, more than 2,000 kids yelling and screaming and laughing, it's amazing. So it was, afterwards we were like, did that just happen? Because it was a bit like it was one of those epic kind of performance shows.
You could teach a whole lesson, a whole lecture to our universities of how to facilitate this project with so many children.
Yeah, I mean, the safety is a big issue. I mean, we would feel terrible if like things like if we had to cancel a show or if the kids start pushing at each other and the little kids are getting smushed by the older kids. You know, it's like not the logo used to be "No Child Without a Smile," but we would be like "No Child Without like being trampled by clowns" or something. So we had to change, you know, like figure out a way to make it so it's like it's safe. Safety is like the first, and then you know even like if you think about why you know with clowns going into war-torn areas or places where they've been hit by natural disaster, it's first make sure they're safe, and then you know have food and health and that kind of stuff, and then you can bring in the more psychological support stuff like that.
And this what you said before, plus the last comment now, actually answers our next question, that would be why.
No, I don't remember these questions, so I didn't like. I'm not cheating here.
So why clowns and why laughter? Why all these games instead of, because some people might say, okay, let's just send medicine, let's help in any other more practical way instead of doing this process.
Yeah. Well, the practical stuff's important. It's like that's when it comes to life and death, that's really important. But when that becomes stabilized, the trauma or the emotional impact of adversity and difficult experiences is also important. And I think the clown is can be a useful tool, vehicle for opening the door towards resiliency and emotional well-being. It's not a lasting thing, but it's something that can open the door so that other more professionals can come in and do that work. And, like for instance, my closest friend from the United States, who's actually the president of Clowns Without Borders USA, who we trained together in physical theater school in Northern California, and he was part of my first tour. So he was also one from the beginning. His name's Tim Cunningham, and he's both, he just finished his PhD in public health. He's a nurse, and he's a clown. And 2 years ago, he was working in Liberia during the Ebola crisis as a nurse, and like going there and working in the pediatric areas. And then just this year, he's gone back to Liberia and he's done Clowns Without Borders tour. And the same spaces, the same places that he was before. And I think that kind of, you know, like, so first you might need to do that other stuff, the life or death things, but to come back, and these are now children who, you know, a lot of them have lost loved ones, and yet there is that, the way that clown also, people think that clowning is just like focusing on the joy and the fun and the play, and that's really important. But like within a clown show, we can play with all the ranges of the emotions, from like great laughter and great sorrow. And really, like in some ways, the clown can be like through the red nose, maybe one of the quickest paths to humanity and human connection. I think through the sense of play and wonder and imagination, and also like clowning. It doesn't like, it's not like I come out here and I clown and you laugh. It's like the laughter and the play happens in the relationship to or between. So the laughter is somewhere like here, in between the clown and the audience, and it's that connection. And I think that is something that is when we really are there and we're really performing and we're really present and we're giving our heart. Like you can wear the red nose, but it's like the red nose is here, and it's like that's, I think then the kids really see that, and they are seen as human beings and empowered. We always try and bring children up onto the stage as stars of the shows. One of our shows, we'd have the kids that end up standing on shoulders, and then bring them down, and they would be the end. That would be the end of them being the stars of the shows. And I think that that's something unique, even more than just theater or storytelling or other forms of art performance that are also very powerful. I think there's something unique about that.
What would you say are the challenges you face during your projects or to set up the project?
Oh, I can talk about this more. Are you going to interview too? No? You should be. You could do statements. Anyways, so I think that funding is always an issue. Getting funding for performance tours, especially outside of South Africa, outside of the where there's no funding for international arts performance work. That's difficult. It's also sometimes difficult to explain to people what we're about, or to partner organizations. So they were like, "Oh well, this sounds great. Yeah, we'll perform. You come." And then we have to actually be like, "Well, okay, let's show you a couple photos or a video that kind of shows you what you're going to be actually signing up for." So that's sometimes a challenge. Or going into, it's like when I call someone up and I'm like, "Yes, yeah, I'm calling from Clowns Without Borders," and they're like, "What?" And then I'm like, "Clowns, CLOWNS? Oh, like frowns? No, clowns without them." It's like it goes on. I'm like, and for a while I was like, "Dude, we need to just change the name of this organization because it's too hard to get people to understand." But it's worth the effort to get that. So just that in itself is challenging. Also, we've been improving that a lot. We've been getting better over the years, but in South Africa there isn't much of a tradition of physical theater or physical comedy like there is in Europe or in the United States, and that's grown and changed a lot in the last 10 years. But when I started, it was very hard to find other artists who could do this kind of work, who were South African. So we had to train people ourselves. So that's an issue. Once you start feeling when you're clowning and you start feeling that you start getting self-conscious, or you start wanting to be funny instead of just being funny, you fail. And I've now taught lots of clowns, not least recently, but before I went and did my PhD, I was teaching clown a lot here in South Africa, and I was always like, "No, go back and come back on stage and just be funny, but just don't try to be funny." And that kind of Zen almost. It's like the one hand clapping. How do you be funny without trying to be funny? But when I had to perform for kids on a Clowns Without Borders tour, I didn't have a choice. I have 200 kids in front of me. I have to make them laugh because that's what they're here for. And so my ego goes whoop out the door, and then suddenly I'm there and I'm playful and I'm running into walls and I'm running in place and going ah, and they think that's the funniest thing. I'm like, "Oh God, that's the stupidest thing in the world, but let's do it again." And they're like, "Ah!" That's really such a simple, but because it's not what I'm doing. It's the connection that I'm giving with the children, and so then it became easier for me to perform for adults.
Yeah, and even the ability that you said before to just be flexible with your experience traveling around all of these countries and being able to do all kinds of different programs. It's not just this specific thing that you do It's what you said before about choose your adventure.
Yeah.
Being able to work like this, if you're able to go everywhere and work with everyone, you see 2,000 children in one school and you just go for it.
We have to add
it's
that to
an
the
amazing skill for a facilitator.
Yeah.
No matter what facilitator, even if it's clown or theater.
That's interesting because, like, so in my research, now I have like a PhD from Oxford, right? So in my research, I do a lot of cultural adaptation work. So, like, for instance, part of Clowns Without Borders, we developed this, one of the things we've developed is a parenting program with universities of Oxford and Cape Town and Bangor and the World Health Organization and UNICEF and Clowns Without Borders. So it's like the last one is, and Clowns Without Borders. Like, I understand all the connections between those other institutions, but what's Clowns Without Borders? And it's because I kind of am both at Oxford and Clowns Without Borders that I kind of, Clowns Without Borders brought the sense of play and connection and adaptability to creating a parenting program that was based on, and also the cultural expertise. So it was based on what works in high-income countries, and we wanted to make one here. So we made one. We've created 2 parenting programs, one for young children, ages 2 to 9, and one for teens with their parents, ages like 10 to 17. And so my work academically is to look at how you take this program from South Africa and move it to the Philippines and to Thailand and to South Sudan, and what are the different, how do you keep the core and change what needs to change so it can connect to the people that you're working with, you're facilitating. So I'm usually training facilitators or coaches, but they're the ones who work with the parents. So it has to resonate, it has to be applicable. And the same thing for a show. If I was going to go do a show in an area like that, I would have my idea, like my routines, the things that I've created, but they will be adapted or changed or tweaked so that it works for the people in the audience.
And I guess this applies to every group, not only if the difference is between New York and Zimbabwe. Even in New York, I guess, if you go in 10 different schools, you'll have to do some adaptations in the program because all the areas are different.
Yeah, we've done tours for deaf and hearing audiences, and then the shows are all nonverbal. So those things have to be changed a bit we add things in the shows that are like that only deaf children will not understand because they understand sign language. So there'll be things that they'll see that are for them, but the whole show needs to be funny for everyone.
While you're talking about the parenting, do you want to start talking about all the other different programs within Clowns and just what Lisa said, how they relate?
Yeah. So as I said before, like with Clowns Without Borders, we always were asking how could we have a more lasting impact on the lives of the children that were really out there to transform or to help open doors for resiliency. And we were working in KwaZulu-Natal, and they partner organization, Wazamoya, asked us, you're doing great work with the kids, but could you work with their parents? And we were like, oh, why? What's wrong with them? And they said, well, they're having challenges connecting to their children, and a lot of them are grandmothers or grandfathers who are now taking care of their children's because they've lost them either from the political violence or from HIV/AIDS. And so it's like rekindling that connection. And so we're like, oh, yeah, sure, choose your own adventure, we can do that. So we then looked and researched and found out what other people were doing, and we also created a curriculum. And at that time, it was for developing relationships between parents and children or caregivers and children around HIV bereavement. So it was with recently bereaved children, and it was a 10-day workshop that we created called the Injabula Family Program. And from there, we started also developing other parenting programs. And so one of the main things that Clowns Without Borders does, and the reason why we do it, is our parenting programs or family programs. And one of the main reasons we do that is a clown can come for a day and do a show. A facilitator could come and work with kids for a week or every week for 10 days. But if you can change the relationship between the parents and the children, that it's going to last their entire life. So especially when you start working with them at the early age, but even with the teens, it's really important for risk reduction and communication between parents and children, around difficult issues around sexuality, all these kind of things that are changing for teens. And so we created with those partners these 2 parenting programs that I mentioned earlier. And so that's a big part of the work, like in the office behind you, is our work that we do with Parenting for Lifelong Health, and that is to really help other partner organizations, like big ones like Catholic Relief Services or PACT Tanzania, and small ones like Seven Passes Initiative or Kaiskama Arts Trust in the Eastern Cape, to be able to implement these parenting programs that we've helped develop. So we no longer deliver these programs ourselves. We used to do that all the time, and now we're kind of training and supporting facilitators. So that's a big part of our project, or our programs. And we are doing that in like South Africa, Lesotho, Uganda, South Sudan, the DRC, Kenya, and Tanzania. And then also through my work at Oxford, we've taken those programs to Philippines and Thailand, and soon Montenegro, and maybe other countries we don't know. There's always a new, I get an email for a new Zimbabwe soon, maybe. So these things. So we're now really helping with the scale up of those programs. And some people are like, sometimes even me, I'm like, how is that Clowns Not Borders? And I have to remind myself, like, well, where in those programs are we putting a red nose on it? Is it like, are we helping develop like loving relationships between parents and children? Are we trying to spark a sense of play with an idea of helping parents see the world of the child through the child's eyes? And so in that sense, it is very much part and parcel of our work. And so that's one of our programs, a big part. And then we also have a program called Our Story, Your Story. And it's working at using autobiographical storytelling to connect people through generations, across cultures, across economic divides, racial divides. So that's also a really powerful project, and mostly through storytellers and facilitators of storytelling. But that same, if you ask me, like, what do I do now when I perform, I mostly tell stories and play my banjo. But it's just the same for me. It's like the clowning comes out through that, but the connection and the playfulness and the bringing imagination out there, and like making people see each other, and the thing to be heard and to be respected and be seen is the same for me, at least for Our Story, Your Story projects. Yeah, those are the most. We also have like a Clowns Without Borders toolkit, which kind of helps partner organizations integrate arts-based approaches within their ongoing services that they provide. And so, like, we've done this in Kenya, where we've worked with economic empowerment facilitators, but they used to only tell lectures, and it was very dry, and so we helped redesign their curriculum so that they can be more participatory, more active, and then it's taking like all the different things that we can do and bringing them into their work.
So you have the parenting program, Our Story, Your Story, and what's the clowning? Do you still tour shows?
Yeah. I mean, that's like our core.
You've spoken about that, haven't you?
Yeah, so we do shows. We do tours in rural or urban areas. Usually the urban areas are more targeted at marginalized populations, like maybe like African migrants or nationals that are living in slums in cities. And like this year we did a tour of the Northern Cape and the Eastern Cape, and KwaZulu-Natal, and in South Sudan. We've done work in Malawi. And those shows we try and put together a team of like 3 to 5 or 6 artists. And the ones that are international, the artists volunteer their time to perform for Clowns Without Borders. And then the ones that are within South Africa, they get paid, because we're really also committed to supporting artists. It's not very easy to be a performing artist in South Africa, so we want to support them financially in their careers as well.
Are you the only Clowns Without Borders that offer these other programs?
Yeah.
That's what I thought.
Is this that makes Clowns Without Borders South Africa unique? I mean, what would you say that...
and why did you choose to do that?
So, first the unique and then the why.
Yeah.
Okay, so unique, well, we're unique because, first of all, we're now, besides Brazil, we're the only country that has, in the low or middle income country, that has a Clowns Without Borders chapter. So, like, we're a very diverse group of people, unlike the other Clowns Without Borders chapters that can be more, less diverse. But also, people from, like, in South Africa, we have so many different ethnicities too. So our tours are quite, like, trying to celebrate that as aspect of intercultural partnership. Or even, like, the Our Story, Your Story project. It's people who are white, colored, black, all working together to connect communities through storytelling. And I think that's one of the things that makes us really unique. And the other is that we have, we think that the work of Clowns Without Borders goes beyond just the shows. Our shows are really important, but the other work is also, I mean, the other organizations will do empowerment stuff and facilitate workshops, but we have, like, these programs around parenting. And your question about why is, or why have we gone that way? It's kind of, it's not like we sat out and we were like, this is where we're going to go. It's more that, it's more like how you create a clown show. It's like, oh, I have this idea. Okay, let's unpack it. Let's see what happens. Oh, look, and now it's this thing. And that's kind of like, I never thought we would be helping take parenting programs to scale for 40,000 people in Tanzania. But now we are, because we have this expertise and that's what we offer. So, it's challenging within the organization to link the two parts or the three parts together. The storytellers are like, we're not really clowns. What does it mean to be that? And the Parenting for Lifelong Health people are like talking about psychometric measurements and, you know, pooling data and t-tests and, like, statistical analyses and all that. And then the clowns are like, let's make shows, you know, and it's like the artists are. And so I'd like to bring those together. And we have this really wonderful artistic director, Jane, who has, like, offered workshops for clowning for our non-clowns. So and the workshops are not just how to be a clown, but also, like, how do you bring a sense of clown to your work, but also to the work that you're doing. So, like, the work is like how you come to work every day, and, like, sense of, like, openness and sense of playfulness, and which is really important for managing stress. But also, like, what does it mean? Like, where's the clown in the work that you're doing when you're going to these countries and representing Clowns Without Borders, and what does that mean? Yeah.
So, how would you like to see Clowns Without Borders in South Africa in 50 years from now? Is there, like, a really long-term dream that you have?
Yeah, in 50 years from now, I don't want there to be a Clowns Without Borders South Africa. How's that? I don't want us to have to be here doing the work. I hope that I'm not part of Clowns Without Borders in 50 years. I mean, it'd be great at 90. I'd be 91 years old. And I'd be like, yeah, it's okay, God. You know, kind of thing. It'd be kind of funny, but like, on the medium term, we're really looking at creating a sound, financial, sustainable basis for the organization, so that we can respond to emergency situations, so that we can continue to build our network in South Africa of artists and across cultures and nations of collaboration. And so that we don't have to worry at the beginning of the year, will we have enough money to pay staff and bills and stuff at the end of the year, and how are we doing? So that kind of, for me as director of the organization, is a big kind of, a lot of my effort goes into kind of helping to create that foundation, that kind of security. It's so interesting because I'm at that point in my life anyway, so I'm doing that in my own life as well. But I think it's important now to, like, make that so that before we used to do shows on the shoestring and, like, do things that were like, we got like $1,000. Okay, we've got enough. We can like ask people to stay in their houses, and we'll do it. Now it's more like we really want to, like, keep supporting the organization. and I'd love to see us going into different places or thinking of new ways of working with organizations. I'd love us to be doing more work in South Africa, in places where we haven't worked. We still could do a lot more around the sense of marginalization of like LGBTIQ communities, of children who are disabled, especially deaf children, of communities where people are not South African, and there's a lot of xenophobia. And those areas are really hard. We found that very difficult to find funding to continue. We've done little projects, but we haven't done something that's like has a good foundation. So I'd love to be able to have us expand those. Yeah, but really, it'd be great if we were like, we'd like to come to your community, and they're like, well, we don't need you. We got people here. So it's like, oh, great, good. I'll go back to doing my other stuff.
And what was so far a magical moment for you in the field?
Well, it kind of answers that question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's like every moment's a magical moment. It's kind of funny that way. I guess it's like a life lesson. It's about like your perception or response to a situation, and instead of being reactive, responding to it with the sense of like, okay, so it's not what we thought it was going to be. Show up at a place or a town and there was nobody, like when we showed up in Lesotho and we were in Simonkong and we were there to do a week of shows and none of them had been organized. And so like, okay, well, we'll figure something out. We went and organized our own shows, and it's like everything kind of always fits together. Like one time we had sponsorship for a vehicle from an organization, and that sponsorship, we were going to go on tour. I arrived in South Africa. It was in early days. And we were going to go to tour the next Monday, and I was in South Africa on Friday, and I found out we no longer had that sponsorship. And something just happened. On Monday, suddenly we had a sponsorship from Europcar, and now they've been like covering us for transport for the last 12 years. And it's like, it's kind of like magic. And I really feel like it's the way you approach the situation that makes magic possible in a kind of real way, not in a sleight of hand way.
It's very interesting that the moments you pick that were the most important, the most magical for you were moments that something was about to go wrong.
Yeah.
But somehow it became wonderful.
It's kind of a credit to your team and the way you work, though, is that you're able to, in adversity or in situations where things could go wrong, pull it together and work together to make it work.
Like it looks like a disaster, and then suddenly everything comes into place, but it's completely not what you planned it to be. But you find a way to make it work. One time Sibongile and I were supposed to represent Clowns Without Borders at a conference. It was a festival, storytelling festival in Canada, and I forgot that you needed a transit visa when you flew through the United States, and so Sibongile got locked up in immigration. And all her stuff was sent to another place too, and so I lost the clown basically in the United States, somewhere in Chicago or Detroit, and it was a disaster. And we had 2 days, and then for some reason miraculously she was able to convince them. They're like, "Why are you coming into this country?" She's like, "I'm a clown. What do you work Clowns Without Borders?" They didn't understand. She had to show them stuff, and eventually she convinced them to come through, and it all worked out at the end. But it's it's always we're teetering we're at the brink of disaster. And I think that's how a clown kind of operates in performance as well. It's that's kind of one of my inspirations of clowning, was Charlie Chaplin and Buster Keaton, and the way that something is going to happen and all these things are going to go, and you're thinking at the end of the day, the clown's still standing and walking off into the sunset, as Chaplin would do.
Wonderful. And is there anything else you would like to add? Something we didn't ask but you would like to talk about?
I find it weird that I'm talking. I'm about this. I mean, I know I started the organization, but it's like, you know, it's the people in the office and all around South Africa who, you know, like, sometimes I don't even know where Sibongile is, because she's out there, like, sometimes in Kinshasa, and sometimes in Kampala, teaching people how to be great facilitators, collaborative facilitators, and so I really feel like I've just been away for 5 weeks, because I mostly do now my work, my main job is actually a researcher at Oxford. Actually, my full-time job is that. This is another job on top. So used to be my main job, and now because I have this wonderful group of people, I'm able to do that research thing. And I come back here, and like yesterday was my first day back for 5 weeks, and I was just filled with so much joy of seeing how dedicated people are working, and they really give their heart to the organization, and so yeah, the work that we've done and the way that we've grown over the last 14 years is not. It's like maybe I've been very much inspired by as much by other people I work with. It's the collaboration that I think is really, I think would be my 6th word. Collaboration. Yeah. The